So since we have photographers, I thought I might ask, has anyone ever tried getting one of their works done up in a metal print before? And how did you like that?
That's a good starter question.
Or does anyone own any metal prints by anyone else? Because I decided to go out and as a birthday present to myself, or maybe my twin sister, I'm not sure. I ordered a couple metal prints. So
I'm not a photographer, but I've handled metal print photography. And I think they're beautiful. I mean, I don't know. I don't have strong feelings either way, I suppose. I do like the displayability of it, like just the photo itself. Like it doesn't need a frame or anything. Like just I like that part of it. But yeah, I kind of wish Liz Momarski was on because she's one of our artists and she does metal printing quite often for her photography. I'm sure she would have opinions, I'm sure.
Well, I'm looking forward to them arriving.
Yeah, I've never printed on metal, but they look nice. Ning, aren't yours at Cumaica Coffee on metal?
Yeah, they are. I think for mine, this like storms and clouds, they come out better on metal, or metallic paper also.
Do they tend to carry better contrast for those type of scenes?
Yeah, exactly. It kind of like when you walk into your room, it immediately catches your eye because of the reflection on like the whiter and silvery parts. So yeah.
Oh, that's what I've noticed in metal prints, and that's one of the reasons that I selected. I selected two photos with very vivid contrasts between red, blues, and greens. So a shamrock spider, which if you've ever seen, you wouldn't be able to forget because it's bright white, bright orange.
Okay, I think we're gonna get this party started. So I'm gonna just do my little spiel and we'll get through the visual presentation and we'll get to know our artists a little bit more. Welcome everyone to our virtual reception. We are here to celebrate the works of Russ Aguilar, Ning Ma Toni Toscano, and this exhibition is now on view at Cumaica Coffee, 4726 Mission Street until August 3rd, 2022. And now a quick overview of the Art in Neighborhoods program. For those who aren't familiar, it was initiated in 2015 with the intention of facilitating spontaneous artful discoveries by locals and tourists alike. We partner with venues that are not typical white walled galleries or museums, but spaces we frequent as busy urbanites, including cafes, restaurants, activity sites, hotels, and community centers. With the goal of bolstering our artist community with exposure and potential art sales, this program also intends to bring an influx of business to the participating venues. As when you are aligned with ArtSpan, you are aligned with our community-driven mission to keep arts alive in San Francisco. We are gathered to celebrate Russ, Ning, and Toni's art, which is on view at Cumaica. Like I said, this neighborhood cafe is a cozy spot to enjoy a fresh cup of coffee, tea, delicious snacks as well. Stop by to view the works in person and enjoy the unique energy of the Excelsior District. If you're going to view in person, you should use our QR codes, which is beside each artwork, and you can scan the code to be directed to the online store to purchase the artwork on the spot. If you want to view the artwork on your own and maybe purchase the artwork as well, you can use the links that will be placed in the chat as we go through the visual presentation. I would like to give a warm welcome to our first artist, Russ Aguilar. Hi, Russ, how are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm great, thanks for asking. We're so happy to have you here tonight. Just a reminder to our attendees, if you have any questions during the artist talks, just pop them in the chat. Okay, Russ, your unique approach captures bugs up close within vivid settings. So my first question for you is, what was your initial motivation to photograph invertebrates?
Sure. So I've always been really fascinated by bugs ever since I was a kid. By bugs, I just mean invertebrates. They have extremely different body plans than vertebrates. They go through different life stages, and in some cases, they transform greatly in between a larva and an adult. You guys have probably seen what beetle larvae look like. It's nothing like a beetle, right? And yet they all require the same things that vertebrates need to survive. They need shelter, they need food, they need air, and so I love investigating in them in their habitat to determine how they're connected to the rest of living living and non-living forms. So there's also a lot of similarities, I think, in between vertebrates and invertebrates. Besides mammals, one of the most complex social species are termites and ants. They have different roles. They have even sections in their colonies. For example, for a graveyard, there are ants that farm fungus. So they'll bring. You may have seen leaf cutter ants that cut up leaves and bring them into their colonies. They can't eat the leaves. They use a fungus which breaks them down into carbohydrates, which they eat. And one very common sight, if you look very closely, is an aphid ant farm, which is basically ants doing animal husbandry, looking after aphids and protecting them from other invertebrates, especially that would never try to attack an ant, but they would go after the aphids. So I'm an environmental educator. I've been working as an environmental educator since 2010. And my work has consisted in bringing underserved communities, especially urban families, into natural spaces. And so I noticed that a really big barrier for a lot of people of all ages and of all backgrounds was a fear of bugs. And it's one of the more common forms of ecophobia. And so I thought, incorporating into art started out as my figuring out how I could become a better educator, how I could highlight bugs, how I could show bugs to students or get them even looking for bugs. Because when you give them a little bit of agency, like, well, we're here where the bugs live and we're going to find them, we're going to learn something about them. I've seen that fear dissipate in remarkably short period of time. I really think that by incorporating them into my art, it can give people an opportunity to overcome their fears or address their fears of invertebrates and see them in a different way. And I really think that almost all of the greatest experiences that we as people are likely to have are a result of overcoming fear. So it's just such an essential part of being human, and invertebrates are an essential part of our environment. And I'll be the first to admit, sometimes I'm afraid of bugs. When a bug is crawling on me and I didn't spot it ahead of time, I react the same way you do. Trust me. If I see it ahead of time, if I'm like, okay, there's an earwig, there's a pincer bug, and I see what it's doing, it's a different story. So yeah, that's how I started focusing on them in my art about 10 years ago is when I started
Wow.
getting close.
Wow, thank you for your background information on like your mild obsession, would you say?
Yeah, I like to call it my monomania.
Monomania. All right, I love it. So your work clearly has a scientific approach to it, and I was curious, do you see yourself taking more creative liberties in the future?
So this is a really good question, and I'm glad that you asked it because I've been expecting a question like this for a long time. So I am, as a science educator, and since I'm working with young adults these days, I'm actually participating in scientific studies, collecting data, but none of those have anything to do with bugs. So what is it that we're actually talking about when we're talking about science? There's usually one of two things. You're describing the structure or function of reality, or you're discovering something new. And my photography doesn't do either of those things. So I would ask you, what is it about it that strikes you as scientific? And if a photographer was taking a photograph of a mountain range, would you ask them if they are participating in geology? Or if someone is taking a photo of a sunset, is that meteorology? Is that climate science? Or maybe if someone's taking a photograph of a road, is that geography? I think that the closest similar medium of my photography is actually street photography, which is not anthropology and it's not social science, because everything that I found is just animals going around their everyday lives in San Francisco, in the streets of San Francisco, in the parks and the gardens of San Francisco. And one thing that I find really interesting in the history of photography, people who were involved in what you might call high art said, well, is photography art? It's more like engineering. It's more like science. Like, you guys are messing around with these plates and these different glasses, and you have to wear these funny hoods. Like, it's not, we can't bring this into a conservatory and teach, but that perspective has changed a lot. However, I also want to highlight that is a good question, because macro photography is a scientific discipline. It's very different from what I do. And that's because when you're identifying an insect, you usually have to kill it and take it into a lab, mount it, and then you use some of the similar gear and techniques that I'll use to get some photographs that I wouldn't say are particularly aesthetic. You're using the photo to define the specific features. I know that I've discovered a new species of sweat bee because you can see this part of its lower leg is different from any other observation that we've seen before. And so I think that the real question is in what way I believe it to be purely aesthetics. And I really appreciate the question, how can I take more creative liberties? Well, one thing that is common in invertebrate photography is working with dead specimens. And so it's using dead animals as a part of art, whether it's in taxidermy or whether it's studio photography, isn't uncommon. It's not my preference. And so I do prefer to find living creatures in their habitat and look at them in those places. Another avenue that I can take is, since I do shoot with digital technology, is using my images in collage. So you might notice that, like, the background isn't well defined. So a lot of photographers might change out backgrounds, or might cut the animal out of a photo and bring it into another piece of artwork. And I'm a naive artist. I'm an outsider artist. That's a new form of art to me, what I would call collage or digital art. And I haven't really developed that part of my skills as an artist. I'm very lucky that my art does sometimes attract those kinds of artists who will say, Russ, I love this tachinid fly. Can I use it in a linotype? Can I use it in a print? And I'll always say yes, because that's I think I get a lot of inspiration from different forms of art. At this present time, I'm proud of the fact that I use a very light editing hands. But the things that I do have control over, I control where I go. I control the types of plants that I'm on, because I know where different plants are in the city. I know different ecotypes. I know the way different parks are managed in San Francisco to know what to expect. All of the lighting in all of my photography is artificial. I use flashes because you cannot expose living creatures with natural light if they're moving, basically, because you need to use such a wide aperture, and you have to shoot at such a high shutter speed in order to get a clear photo. Your only option, in I would say almost every macro photographer, uses external light, an external light source. So I kind of push back on the question that is it influenced by science? I would say just to the extent that I find these interesting from a perspective as a science educator. But I'm not collecting data, and I'm not proposing theories. And I really like to define what I mean when I'm talking about science. And my view here is pure aesthetics, and to try to evoke a reaction from people, and to get them to view something that's really common differently. Kind of like how a street photographer would sit on the same street corner for hours, sometimes days, taking photo after photo after photo after photo, save two. I have a very similar technique when I sit in the same spot in the garden for hour after hour taking the same photos. And what other people never notice, whatever the people don't see on Market Street or on Castro, that photographer's going to capture. And the things that other people aren't seeing in the garden are the things that I'm going to be grabbing and highlighting with my photos.
I really appreciate the pushback and like that conversation, that discourse we just had, that was really insightful for me as well, because I didn't know where you stood with that, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so for my last question, if there's one takeaway from your environmental activism, what should all present attendees know about our local ecosystem?
So my number one thing is, so I'm not a working scientist, I'm an amateur entomologist. So my number one thing for any kind of activism is to look after the people in your community. So I am originally from the Bay Area. I've seen the Bay Area change many different ways. I really believe we need more parks, but we also need more public housing and more low-income housing, because everyone that you meet, everyone that I meet, whether I'm literally working with homeless people or working with millionaires who are donating to an agency that I'm working for, they all want to help the environment. They all want to do something and contribute to the environment. And I do, even people, yeah, people living on the streets, they do, when we get to talking, and they come up with ideas. But we really have to look after our community and make sure the human needs are met before we can make a serious and a long-lasting commitment to the natural environment. So I would just say the number one thing that you can do is find out how you can make human needs being met in your community, in your neighborhood. And I really, truly believe that the rest is going to follow from there. The other thing, the second thing, distant second, is I guess plant native plants, because the bugs love them. And then you'll probably see me wandering around with my camera because you planted native plants, and the bugs will come up, and then photographers will arrive. And that's just the way nature works. So.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I actually wasn't anticipating that answer, and I think you should run for office.
No. I see a couple questions in the chat. So I have never worked with electron microscopy. So some people wonder, what is macro? What's the definition of macro? So it's weird because you think like lenses are literally microscopes. So why do we call it macro photography? So I'm going to use this random card I got in the mail as a demonstration. If this is the sensor on my camera, or the piece of film that I'm using, then if the image of what I'm photographing is larger on that sensor or film than it is in real life, it's a macro photo. So in macro means larger than, so what is being captured is larger than reality. So that seed beetle is a great example. It is smaller than a grain of rice. So it is about half the size of a grain of rice. When the image was cast onto my camera, it was larger than a grain of rice. And so that is what I would call macro. That's what anyone would call macro photography. It's the definition of macro photography. Electron microscopes are very, very expensive. They start at, I think, you need to be a part of an educational institution to use those. I do use microscopes though as a teaching tool. And those can go from ×10 to about ×1000, whereas my lenses are going to go to ×5 at most. So it's a very different type of working with light, for sure. Vanessa asked, what is the least photogenic bug you've ever worked with? So first of all, I think they're all beautiful. They're all my babies. I love them. But I think we can all agree that you guys have seen potato bugs, also known as Jerusalem crickets. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? They're like this big. They look like potatoes. They live in the ground. Jerusalem cricket. Okay. So I mean, it's a very goofy looking bug. It looks like some of those freak you out the most. They're harmless, which is great. I thought they were freaky when I was a kid, and they showed up in, oh, they might pinch. Yeah, they don't inject venom or anything, so that's why I say they're harmless. They look kind of like a potato, except somebody grafted on like cricket legs onto them, like the chunky cricket legs, and they got stripes, and they're very clumsy, and they don't have the most bugs are very afraid of you and they flee. And that's very thoughtful of them if you don't like bugs, because all of a sudden your problem is gone. Potato bugs do not have that same common sense because they live underground. They're like, why is it light? What am I going to do? I'm going to stay right here and scare the crap out of this person for a little while longer. That's how potato bugs work. I've gotten a bunch of photos of them. I don't love their look. I think that it's great since they're so large that I can highlight the details on them. But maybe it's because I'm just so used to them growing up around them that potato bugs are probably going to have to be at the bottom of my list for photogenic insects. So, yeah.
All right.
Somebody got pinched by them. Were you trying to like get it out of your yard?
Excellent. Do we have any other questions, Vanessa, in the chat?
I think Russ got them all. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you, Russ.
And thank you for introducing us to another bug. That sounds horrific, but possibly beautiful. I don't know.
I mean, I get a lot of questions about them because people from other parts of the country, they come here and they find them in their yards and they don't know what to think. They're like, because people's first thought is this an infestation? Do I have to call someone? Before I call someone, I'll call Russ. And then I'm like, no, you can put it back. It doesn't want to be above ground. Trust me. They usually only do anything at night. So if they're above the ground, it's usually because they're looking for a partner, and then they do that, and then they go back underground. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Let's give a small round of applause for Russ and his work. And I've learned a lot about bugs. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Our next artist is Ning Ma. Hi, Ning.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing great.
Excellent. Ning is a globe traveler infatuated with sublime landscapes and captures the simplicity and complexity all in one frame. So Ning, my first question for you, what is your favorite destination to photograph and why?
It's my favorite place is actually Patagonia, which I guess looking at this picture isn't isn't the place captured in this photo. But the reason I really like Patagonia is when I first went there in 2013, and so when I went there, the first day it was at night, so you couldn't see anything. So the next morning when I woke up and you open the blinds, and the scene in front of you is something like every child, you listen to the fairy tale of like long time ago in a place far, far away, and you imagine a place, and that place in your head is like probably not real, but in Patagonia, I think in that moment when I saw it, I was like, okay, this place is actually real. It's on Earth, and it's way more beautiful than I ever even imagined. So I think in all the places that I've traveled to, Patagonia really stands out as having that effect of just very unforgettable.
How many times have you been to Patagonia?
Twice.
Wow, nice. Any other locations have you been more than once?
That's a good question. I think the national parks I've been to more than once, but the international locations usually very remote. So it's actually one of the reasons I got into photography, because I figured I might never come back. So I really want to remember the place well. So
excellent, great. Okay, for my second question, I'm sure you've taken thousands of photos. So what elements are you really looking for that capture your particular style of photography?
I think I thought about this a lot, and I think there's one word that can capture sort of what I'm looking for, and it's energy. So there's internal energy and external energy. So external, it could be something like lighting, it could be color. So something in the landscape itself that is sort of just in that moment in time, it really comes across. So could be lightning storm, could be something along those lines. And then internal energy is like basically when I'm at that moment looking at that scene is an emotional connection. So I think the sort of combining the two, the most impactful images that I've taken, I find are basically have the maximum energy. So whether that's from internal or external or both, I feel like really with photographers who try to use photography as a medium to translate that energy and sort of transmit that energy to the viewer. So when it is effective, it's sort of like self-explanatory, and you sort of, when you see it, you get it immediately. So that's what I try to aim for.
For those who haven't seen this particular work in person, please do. The contrast is wonderful. Ning prints on metal, so it really has this wonderful metallic sheen to it, and it's just breathtaking in person. I have the honor of choosing the work and installing the work, so getting to see the photograph and then see it in person, it really is, you really do have to see the work to experience the energy that you capture, and it's really fantastic. Okay, for my last question for you, what have you learned from all the travels and creating on the go?
Yeah, I think so. My personality, there's different sides of it. There's one side that really likes to plan. So I really like to prepare and get to know a place and research, especially for the mountaineering trips. I think so much goes into the preparation, getting ready for the trip itself, the mountain, all that. And then, but I think this photography, the really nice thing is that there's a quote that I really like, which is that a plan means nothing, but planning means everything. So the process of planning really sort of comes out, even though obviously on a trip, I think everything is spontaneous, nothing can be predicted. So I think photography is sort of really nice medium that kind of marries both sides together. So the perfect image is, for me, when it happened, it was never really planned. It was always at the right place at the right time. And for that reason, I always, I really cherish it because I do feel it's very unique. So even if it's the same place, if it's a different point in time, it's completely different. So that's sort of one thing that I've learned, and maybe it's helpful for other people.
Excellent, thank you so much. That was very insightful, and I really enjoyed like learning about how you bring energy and planning and how the spontaneity all kind of comes together, similar to how Russ deals with bugs, and he doesn't plan on taking a photo of a bug, but hey, they're perfect timing, good lighting. Even if it's external lighting, it's somewhat planned, but he's on it, and so are you. And this gorgeous image really is wonderful. What where did you take this photograph?
Yeah, this was actually from my home in China. So it was in the morning. The sort of window outlooks into the Pacific Ocean, and just the calmness in the morning. There's no noise whatsoever, and you just see the sunrise peaking above the horizon. And every time I look at this image, I remember home, and it just, that stillness, that calmness, it just I like it also the beginning because of the colors. I think it's sort of just, it's the perfect sort of beginning to everything, and there's so much hopefulness captured sort of in the image.
It's quite gorgeous. Once again, you definitely should see this one in person, as with all the works that we have at Cumaica. Ning, thank you so much. Let's check the chat if there's any questions.
I don't see any questions, but I do see a lot of people who resonated with your words on planning and spontaneity and kind of balancing and playing with that, which I too respect, because I'm a much more spontaneous person and I hate planning. But because I feel like plans, I'm like, man, every time you make a plan, it just goes out the window, but you need them.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, Ning. Let's give a round of applause for Ning Ma. Yay. Awesome. Thank you. All right. And our next and final artist to the stage is Toni Toscano. Hi, Toni. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good. All right. So Toni takes the portrait of a flower to another level by using lo-fi techniques, culminating in delicate, soft, and dreamlike imagery. So Toni, you recently moved here from Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
Have you experienced any creative evolutions between the two locations?
A great question. I think I'm still waiting to find that out myself. I just moved in October, so it's been a little over 6-7 months. I think the main things that I have noticed so far, I'm originally from California, and so my work is very introspective. It typically comes from like a place where I'm at, what I'm feeling, what I'm interested in. So it stems from my emotions and where my headspace is. So in Austin, in a place where I was trying to figure out what is home, where is home, what does home feel like. So I think I was coming to my work from a place of longing and uncertainty, and being back in California and in the Bay, I'm noticing that I'm coming to my work with a lot more energy, and maybe more of like a positive, hopeful spin on it. Looking towards like what is there to come, rather than this like feeling of searching and longing. So I think that's the main difference that I've noticed so far. I'm still curious to see what things pique my interest in the Bay. One great thing is that there's a lot of different opportunities to explore different vantage points. So recently I took the ferry out to Treasure Island and was able to get on the water and see the city from a different perspective, which is really cool. And that just like opens up a lot of doors, and just having the architecture and epic nature so close. Yeah, there's just so many amazing opportunities to explore. So
I'm sure the hills help with the different vantage points as well.
yeah.
I have seen your recent work while you're on the Bay Bridge, which is fantastic. So yeah, I'm excited to see where you are now in the Bay Area and how your work evolves from here. These works presented at Cumaica are centered on your floral series, and they are older, so they must be from Texas. Oh.
They are, yeah. Yeah, I took these, this was right in the middle of the pandemic, I think like pre-vaccine, we were still heavily locked down. And these images are fun. The titles come from a place of, I'm almost like feeling like I want to mock these flowers. Like I felt so cooped up and so stuck. And yet there was like these beautiful flowers just everywhere in March. I mean, they explode. And I'm like, this is just so unfair. Like, I'm so mad at you for being this like beautiful thing during this time that's just so confusing and anxiety inducing. But yet they also brought a lot of comfort at the same time. So I was just mad at them.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah. For my second question, I want you to kind of go and tell us more about your process to create such ethereal imagery.
Yeah. I think, like I said, my process really starts from an introspective place, just where I'm at, what I'm feeling. I'm very nostalgic, so I think that's where this dreamy feeling of these photographs comes from. I get really wrapped up in nostalgia, and it's kind of hard for me to pull myself out of it. So just from a mental place, that's where that comes from. The process itself, it usually starts by I'll be walking around a place or I'm really interested in a particular thing. I tend to scope out areas that I want to photograph. It also happens when I'm traveling a lot of times where I'll just spend a day walking around taking photographs. But then I'll keep coming back and revisiting that place. And then I often create these series in one single session, where I'll go spend like an hour to 4 hours just walking around, sometimes biking. I love to get on my bike and ride places, and allows me to see a lot of wider variety of places to shoot than I would just walking. Yeah, and then the process with the camera itself is longer exposures, and then moving the camera while I'm taking the photograph. So it actually becomes a process of feeling like I'm painting with the camera.
And you also try to photograph things that are also moving at the same time.
Yeah.
So there's just like a mixture of motion.
Yeah, exactly. I had the privilege of taking a really fantastic photography course in Austin. It's called the Austin School of Photography. And the way that instructor teaches photography is so different than the way that most people learn the exposure triangle. He teaches it as the camera is a tool that manipulates light, space, and time, rather than your ISO, shutter, aperture. And so he teaches like the aperture and the shutter like control specific, like either light, space, or time, and then how you manipulate each one of those things and create these differentials in your photography, end up with just wildly different results. So I've latched on to the time aspect, and have just continued to try and push that as far as I can.
Awesome, thank you. All right, and for your next and final question, are there any influences that help shape your practice? For example, other artists, photographers, perhaps even music or literature that you kind of pull from?
Yeah, I hope I do not butcher his name. Alexei Tidorenko. He's a Russian photographer, and his photographs, his one series, what was it called? I wrote it down. City of Shadows. It's a series that he took in his city, St. Petersburg. And the way that he captures people and movement in his city was just astounding to me. I think that was the first photographs that I saw that really intrigued and piqued my interest to this like blurry, dreamy quality. That series is extremely melancholy and beautiful. And there's one picture in particular where it's this crowd all leaving the subway at rush hour, and it's focused on the railing, and it's just these ghosts of hands, of all the hands touching and moving up the railing, and it's just amazing. So he has been my biggest influence. Uta Barth is another photographer that I've looked to for a lot of inspiration. I believe she's located in LA now, but she has a lot of different series of photographs that create blurry scenes. She plays with the sense of space and place and no place. And then of course all the impressionist painters, I mean, Monet, Renoir.
Of course, definitely. Yeah, I totally see that. Awesome, thank you so much. That was really insightful. Do we have any questions in the chat for Toni?
Yeah, we have a question. Russ was wondering, are there any spaces in the Bay that really inspire you or give you hope?
I think being on the water and looking back towards the skyline is a place that is just, it just doesn't compare. Just having that distance from the city and seeing it from afar and just like imagining like all of the amazing life and possibility, you know, also all of the struggle and issues that it comes along with, but just removing yourself from the busy city streets and be able to look at it from afar, like it just has a very romantic, beautiful quality to it. So, and then of course all of our amazing parks, Muir Woods, I mean, Headlands, all of those. I try to get out and hike every weekend, as many weekends as I can.
Yeah, a great place to visit if you like Muir Woods is Big Sur. It's actually way better. I prefer over Muir Woods. It's less crowded. I think they have older redwoods there, which is even just a better, like, wow, like these trees are bigger and older and no one's here.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've actually seen the redwoods there. I've been in Big Sur, but I haven't like specifically sought out the redwoods. I'll have to do that.
Awesome, thank you.
And we have one more question.
Sorry.
Toni, have you tried nocturnal photography as well?
Yeah, I've played with it a little bit. I've been more drawn to photography during the day, just, I don't know, just because I am right now. But it is something that I want to continue exploring. I feel like a lot of the photography that you see that plays with movement is at night, playing with lights and things like that. So there's also, I mean, really, there's also like a safety component too. Like I do kind of struggle with the fear of like going out by myself at night to photograph. So I'm figuring out how to navigate that being back in a larger city too.
Totally understood.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a time component with that because you latch onto the time. Night photography, it's like you said, it plays with lights, but that slower shutter speed is that's where the magic happens. And I think you could really kind of ease into that, as part of your evolution, maybe now that you're in the Bay Area. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So that is going to be the end of our visual presentation. Thank you again to our artists. Let's give a small round of applause to Toni and all the artists that are presenting at Cumaica. You can see the artworks online at our VAIN gallery, which is Virtual Art in Neighborhoods. And you can also see it in person, which I highly recommend. You please support Cumaica. They are a wonderful grassroots coffee house. And it's a wonderful neighborhood in the Excelsior, just to see the energy and vibrancy of the southern districts in San Francisco. So please see the artwork in person. And that is the end of our slideshow. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll all join each other. And gallery view, hello. Hi, Jeanette. How's it going?
I'm good.
Good to see you. You're always here. Thank you for joining us always. Just really appreciate it. Yeah.
I guess if I could respond to one thing in Toni's work. So for me, in my photography, movement is my enemy because that leads to blur and that leads to a lack of clarity of my subjects. I also there's two, and then the other thing that I wanted to say about that is I control the light, but in macro photography, in almost all of my photos, most of the frame is out of focus because my aperture is so wide, only this tiny little slice of light is in focus. And since I'm shooting at such a small scale, I'm showing you things that it does not look like that with the naked eye. You can't, it doesn't, that's the beauty of macro photography. Like, even if you put your face all the way up to it, your eye is a different type of lens than the macro photo. Since you're seeing it at such a small scale. And so one similarity I see between our works is that you are taking things that are somewhat familiar to us and making them look very different by using time and light differently. And for me, I'm using my own light system, like I'm showing to you right here, actually. So I'm using my own light system and making things extra sharp and focusing on extra small things, and also making them look like they wouldn't, even if you were right there next to me taking the photo. So very cool stuff.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for calling in.
Hi. You're welcome. Do
you have any questions for the artists?
Well, I was typing them in, so I feel like I got my responses. Thanks. Yeah, I was just appreciating that each of the artists are just interested in habitat and land and critters and plants. Like that's wonderful. Yeah, what a good grouping. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the beauty of a call for art where I don't know what's going to be submitted. So the spontaneity, the magic, the coincidence that you three all submitted to this one call all have very similar like subject matter and energy, that it was just a beautiful synergy that kind of culminated out of this grouping. And I'm very proud of this small but mighty exhibition at Cumaica. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So honored to be part of it.
Yeah, me too. Really fortunate.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna wrap things up. Our team at ArtSpan would like to thank everyone for attending our virtual reception tonight. We are committed to continuing our efforts to connect artists to the public. And at this time, I'd like to propose a toast to our artists, Russ, Ning, and Toni. So congrats, you all. Cheers. Cheers.